back in history, you see strongholds being built in each of those eras. And typically in previous eras, strongholds were built as storehouses for food and water. In the era that we are coming out of the end of here, that was designed at the end of the Second World War, the strongholds of this particular era are really characterized more as storehouses for wealth. And so if you look at the fossil fuel sector of stronghold, fossil fuel as a sector has made around about $3 billion of profit per day for the last 50 years. Okay, now that is a massive storehouse of wealth.
Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. I'm Richard Metcalf, founder of X Quadrant, and my mission is to help the world's top CEOs and entrepreneurs shift from incremental to exponential progress and create a huge positive impact on our world. Now, that requires you to reinvent yourself and transform your business. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Today I speak with Stuart McLachlan. He's the CEO of Anthesis Group. And this is a business which consults in the whole area of sustainable business models. He's grown the business from 2013 to over 1,000 people across several continents, with companies that include many Fortune 500 businesses, FTSE 100 companies. And we get into a really deep conversation here around what sustainable performance is. He's written a book called Adventures in Sustainable Performance, and it shows he's a deep thinker. He's really thought about the climate challenge and the incentives that are stacked up against leaders, and the way that leaders can reimagine systems to multiply their impact for good by changing the very parameters in which we're playing. You see, as a CEO, we can either play within the game, within the rules that exist, or we can reinvent the game. And it's the second thing that Stuart's so passionate about. So if you want a conversation that's going to stretch your thinking, somebody who's really focused and determined to change from one era to another era of business, then you're going to love this conversation with Stuart McLachlan.
Hi, Stuart, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Good to be here.
So what I know about you is that not only are you the chief exec of Anthesis Group, consulting company on a mission to change the way we think about sustainability, the companies work on with sustainability issues, but you've also somehow, in the midst of running this, I think it's over 1,000 people group now, you managed to write a book, which is pretty impressive too. So I want to know I know your book is called Adventure of Sustainable Performance. First of all, what is sustainable performance in the first place? And what was your own adventure that led you to write this book?
Yeah, so I have to say I had a co-author as well, Dean Sanders, who's a friend, colleague, co-author, and so he needs to take quite a lot of credit for it as well. Yeah, so I think if I just sort of frame the big picture, then that will allow me to talk a bit about where we see sort of sustainable performance and what it means. So we see ourselves as really coming to the end of an era that is characterized by certain models and systems, and with any era you see the building of certain strongholds. So you can look at linear business models, or a particular form of consumerism, or a particularly sort of really short-term perspective on capitalism or fossil fuels. These are all the kind of strongholds of what we now consider to be the old era, and we believe that the world recognizes now the brokenness of those models, and that they're started to decay and break down. And as they do, the world will be stepping into a place of disruption, a place of potential peril, but also a potential of a place of potential of value creation, opportunity, hope, as we start to reimagine what the new era might look like. And so, we're trying to set things within a sort of perspective of a journey and all the implications of that, where leaders are having to move from being leaders that are particularly effective at managing the status quo and seeking all those kind of incremental efficiency gains, to more pioneering form of leadership, where you actually got to step into this place that is unknown, that is full of disruption, and where they had to then take all of their stakeholders with them. Not necessarily all their assets, because some of the assets that they've currently got will be stranded in the old era, but obviously some of the assets will be of value, and they're going to have to steward them across this transition zone into the new era. And the question is that people pose, so, well, what are we trying to achieve? Is it net zero? The world's talking about net zero, and or is it a circular business model, or social justice? And, these are all ingredients really associated with the model for the new era. And we haven't designed that model yet. We can see some of the ingredients, but it's not probably designed. But we call that, whatever that model is, when it is finally designed, a model that operates within planetary boundaries, has got a different partnership with nature, that builds off what we hope will be a just transition. That model is what we call sustainable performance. And we see the journey to get there as an adventure, hence the reason for the title, The Adventure of Sustainable Performance.
Interesting. So I love this idea of this journey into the unknown. Tell me about the word strongholds. It's a very specific word. So what's the impact of these strongholds? Like I think you mentioned linear business models and some others. What does that mean that there's a stronghold? Are those things that are basically just really hard to dismantle? Is that basically the point? Things which are basically sucking us into their orbit?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we've used quite a lot of metaphors in the book, and I guess this is one. And I think that you sort of see, if you go back through the different eras back in history, you see strongholds being built in each of those eras. And typically in previous eras, strongholds were built as storehouses for food and water. In the era that we are coming out of the end of here, that was designed at the end of the Second World War, the strongholds of this particular era are really characterized more as storehouses for wealth. And so if you look at the fossil fuel sector as a stronghold, fossil fuel as a sector has made around about $3 billion of profit per day for the last 50 years. And now that is a massive storehouse of wealth. And now, whether it's a teenager from Sweden, or whether it's big financial institutions, or whether it's the general public, people are telling that particular stronghold, your time is up. Your time is up. You've got to come out of that stronghold, and you've got to hit the off-ramp. And you've got to, for them, it's about energy transition, but it's the same issue, that they've got to step into this transition zone. And what we have typically seen I've been in this world for 30 years, so I've been observing it for 30 years, is that when leaders of these strongholds are challenged in the way that we are challenging them now on this podcast, we have typically seen leaders trying to shore up the walls of the stronghold. That has been their response. Why would you want to step out of the stronghold into a place of disruption and a place of jeopardy? That goes against the instincts of leaders. The instincts of leaders is very much to shore up the walls. Let us keep our stakeholders here. And increasingly, over time, we've seen a number of these industry sectors using greenwashing as a way to create a fantasy zone, climate denial as a way of creating a fantasy zone into which they can take their stakeholders and convince them that everything's okay. We don't have to come out of the stronghold. We can stay here. It's safe. This is a place where we feel secure. And because of these climate denial facts, as they're putting them, right, they have been able to shore up their pension pots for another 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and so it's gone on. I think what's different now, and there are a number of things that we can look at in terms of why those strongholds have been shaken to a point of potential destruction, is that we're now facing the big stick of compliance. So we've got lots of new regulation and legislation that's coming in. So leaders are now having to face up to the big stick of compliance that is bashing them out of strongholds. They have no option now but to step out into this transition zone, into this journey.
Yeah, so what you're saying there is that actually these regulatory boundary conditions are really important, right? So it sounds like there's, from your perspective here, if you're winning in the old era, you're not going to want to change to the new era.
Exactly. Why would you? And it's just it goes against the instincts. It goes against human nature. It goes against the types of leaders that we have created who have been highly effective at managing businesses that operate within the status quo.
So how do you go about advising those leaders? I mean, if you're facing somebody who's got an existing business, right, generating value, serving customers, serving stakeholders in different ways, how would you encourage them to go on this adventure in some way, right? Like, without being irresponsible, well, they might see as being an irresponsible figure, right? Hurling their business into the forces of the unknown. How do you help them to take some steps? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've worked over many years for particularly progressive leaders who have recognised that this moment in time is inevitable, and it's it's the right thing to do to step into the journey. So there are some early pioneers, but that is tiny fraction of all the leaders around the world who are now having to face up to the reality that they've got to make. So I think there's we liken it to talk about another kind of metaphor. We liken it to being a base camp. So the world's a base camp, and it needs to get to Everest. And if you're at base camp and you want to go to the summit, what you don't want is a Sherpa that turns up with a strategy report that says, "Hey, have a read of this. This talks about the theory by which you might want to get to the summit, and a nice process that you might want to follow. And good luck. Hope it helps you." And then goes away. You don't want that kind of support. What you want is a Sherpa that turns up and says, "I'm here to help. All right, I know how to do this stuff. I've got the oxygen tank. I've got the mask. I've got the equipment. I'm going to train you in terms of how to use it. I'm going to build confidence in you. I'm going to build capacity and capability in you. Right? And when we are ready, we're going to embark on the journey, and I'm going to be alongside you all the way to the summit. And by the way, I've been there before a few times, so I know what it looks like." Right? And that's what these leaders need. And through what we started 10 years ago in Anthesis, where we could see that there was so much talk about sustainability, there was hardly any action. Where there was action, there was a very high failure rate. And we looked at why that was. And so we've tried to piece together that sort of more holistic, solution-focused, solutions-orientated proposition within Anthesis that is the Sherpa that turns up and says, "Hey, I've got the experience, I know what it looks like, I've got the equipment, I'm going to build capacity in you. I'm not going to extract value, I'm not going to extract capacity from you as an organization to strengthen up my consultancy operation," right? Because that doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the world. What we need to do is we need to build competence and capability within our clients' organizations so they can actually do the trip themselves.
So Stuart, that implies the trip, you've already done the trip, right? I mean, what I was hearing was we were going into this kind of liminal zone, this unknown space where we don't know the answers. So where do these shippers come from in that sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, and it would be wrong, and I would be misrepresenting this situation if I said that anybody has been to the new era. So if anybody says, "Hey, we've been to the new era, we know exactly what it looks like, and we can take you there," right? Then we would have a few questions. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we don't have lots of people who have been scouts, if you like. Scouts is probably a good word to use in this context. That have been out, can see the next steps, and know what net zero looks like, and know what circular business models look like, and know what works and what doesn't work. Has got the experience, all that kind of thing, and they can bring that back. But as I said before, the next era, the new model that we call sustainable performance, we've got a sense now as to what the ingredients are, but actually we don't know how it all fits together. And that's part of the excitement. And that's what I keep on saying to people who say, we feel despair for the next generation, because of, all the concerns about, the climate science and so on. And I understand that, but it is an incredibly exciting time to be alive as the next generation, because you will get the opportunity to be able to reimagine, redesign, piece together in a much more effective way what that new model looks like.
So if you're a leader in, a business that's got, it's not an oil and gas business per se, but it's not a green tech or an NGO or something else. You're just like a regular business. You're doing your stuff. There's some environmental footprint. What's the mental model that you'd start to give? You start to invite these leaders to think about, right? Because they might say, I like just this small business or mid-sized business. Can I really make much of an impact? Does it really matter what I do? Can I just continue with my existing model, leave it to other people, government or whatever? So what kind of tools would you wanting to put in their toolkit, or what lenses would you want to give them to start to see the world through?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the way they're going to start to feel the effects of all of this is for companies, and a lot of the biggest corporations in the world are signing up, for example, to net zero. For you to be able to achieve net zero, you need to do what we call scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 and 2 is more around your direct emissions. Scope 3 is where you look upstream and downstream in terms of the impact of what you do as a business. And that is particularly meaningful when you look into your supply chain, because then you have to start to measure the carbon performance of your suppliers. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure from coming further up to the corporate food chain on all organizations, small and large, to not just to measure their performance, that's the first step, but then to go on the journey with their customers and their clients. And that's typically in a sort of B2B model. In a B2C model, their customers are now starting to apply a lot of pressure, a lot of research around this at the moment, that the buying decisions and customer behavior is changing according to the sustainability performance of products. So that's another pressure that small and large organizations are going to feel. And then, of course, employees are making their selections as to who they want to work for according to purpose and mission and ethics and those kind of things. And that's why, we sort of say, well, we absolutely understand why money is the muscle of mission, but businesses should not exist just to make money. That is not the reason for their existence. We recognize that there are superior financial returns, superior profits on the other side of the purpose. But that's only if you authentically focus on the purpose and the mission of the organization. And then you get all these other benefits with your stakeholders starting to crowd around what you're trying to do. And then we find that very powerful.
Yeah. How have you found that to be true in your own business?
Yeah, well, we are B Corp, and for those people who don't know what B Corp is, so typically businesses operate in such a way that they believe that their primary mission is to deliver financial return to their shareholders, and actually, I mean, for the historians amongst your listeners will probably know more about this than me, but it sort of flicked in the US around a famous economist called Milton Friedman, who lived about 40, 50 years ago. And that's when it shifted from businesses believing that within the Constitution, I think actually in America, the Constitutions were changed in terms of when you bought off the shelf articles of association, as we call it here in the UK, to your primary responsibility, your fiduciary duty as directors is to look after your shareholders and to give them maximum financial return. And actually in the UK and other parts of Europe, when you take articles of association and you read them, most of us don't read them, but it actually says you have a responsibility to stakeholders. Now, it doesn't always feel that way because we tend to follow the way that things are done in other parts of the world. But B Corp reestablishes your responsibility to the total value chain, rather than just seeing your corporation as a stronghold in itself, if you like, where your customers and your suppliers are external. And so, you use your buyer leverage over the supplier leverage to sort of maximize advantage and maximize financial returns within the stronghold to be able to deliver against your fiduciary duty rather than getting your arms around the full value system. So for us, being a B Corp is meaningful. We employ a lot of vocational talent, and they want to work for B Corp and they want to work for an organisation that is authentic. We set a lot of targets around the impact that we want to make in the world, which we believe we've got teeth, and we spend a lot of time measuring those. We've got a whole impact framework, an impact team that help us to be able to measure against impact KPIs alongside the financial KPIs that are.
So give me an example of those. What would an example of an important impact KPI be for you?
Yeah, so we set a KPI where we want to be able to take 3 gigatons out of the system, carbon equivalent, through this what we call a decisive decade. Decisive decade being the decade we're in at the moment. We call it decisive decade because what happens in this decade will determine what happens thousands of years to come. So we're at a choice of pivot point. And we feel that, we have a responsibility as an organisation with probably more experts in this area than any other company in the world to deploy them in a way that is going to deliver maximum impact and then measure that kind of impact. So we want to get to the end of this decade and look back and think, well, this business that we've created has acted as a vehicle to deliver positive impact in the world. And so we've set this 3 gigaton target. That's about 50% of the annual emissions of the United States, just to put it into perspective. So that's one of the headline KPIs.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation. This is just a quick interlude to remind you that my book, Making Time for Strategy, is now available. If you want to be less busy and more successful, I highly recommend that you check it out. Why not head over to makingtimeforstrategy.com to find out the details. Now, back to the conversation.
And so if you were to zoom out and go ahead 10 years or, I don't know, something like this into your own business, what would multiplying your impact look like? If you were here in 10 years' time or something like that, and you were looking back and thinking, wow, this was, I remember we had that conversation on the podcast in 2023, but here we are in 2033. I can be happy about what we've achieved, the impact we've had. What would that be? What would that be for you?
Yeah, so for us, we know that to be able to deliver the impact that we want to make, there just aren't enough people in the world with the expertise that is required to be able to then just lean into human capital to be able to make this happen. So, we're looking at financial instruments, we're looking at digital assets, etc. All the kind of things that we can get AI, all the kind of things that we can bring it into the mix. A bit like the Sherpa with the oxygen tanks and the mast. We need to bring this equipment in to help our clients use it effectively to be able to deliver exponential impact. So we're very focused in terms of how we pull the ingredients together to provide these more holistic solutions. But also, in fact, let me just give you an example. So we're working with farmers in South Africa and in Latin America. And we are developing programs where we're effectively saying to those farmers, if you move from farming in the way of the old era to a new methodology that is regenerative, then not only will you get better yields, but we will be able to get those projects registered and we will be able to unlock climate finance to give you an alternative source of income. So the way the old era has worked is they are suppliers outside the corporate stronghold. They're external. And so their customers have been saying year on year, more yield, lower price. That's the deal. And if you don't perform, then we've got lots of competition over here that will take the business away.
Right. So it's really about, so you're really trying to reimagine the ecosystem a bit here and find other incentives, other streams of income.
And then of course the chemical companies come in and say, hey, the only way you'll be able to get more yield is to use our chemicals. So they chuck more and more chemicals at it, which is stripped about 50 to 60% of the nutrients in the soil. And what we're finding now is that, for these farms that have decided to embrace this new methodology, where there are droughts in different parts of the world, there is dry and arid land, and then there are patches of healthy grassland where they're double stocked with livestock, and often it's cows. The cows are in calf, so they're actually seeing a significant improvement in yield with lower costs because they're not having to spend so much on the chemicals, and then they're getting this alternative source of income associated with this climate finance. And that's coming in from other international corporations. So all of a sudden now, if you are a retailer buying, say, milk from the dairy sector, then there's a disruption. There's a disruption in the value chain. And that's another good example as to how big corporations now need to recognize that they've got to move to a total value system by looking at their business as an ecosystem which embraces the suppliers and their customers.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of the theory of disruptive innovation, where sustained innovation basically relies upon the same ecosystem, the same channels, the same suppliers, and therefore the existing players tend to just dominate because they've got all those relationships. But disruptive innovation tends to go for things which are not part of the system, new customers, new suppliers, new channels, which the actual incumbents then find it hard to replicate because that's not their history, that's not their legacy, actually works against them in some ways. I was with one of my clients and part of my own CEO community that I was speaking with this week. We had a retreat just 2 days ago, and he was explaining how he'd built a business that's probably worth $150, $200 million in about 3 years because he had spotted these different revenue or value pools, if you like, that weren't being used within his industry. It allowed him to create something which is addressing a really significant source of carbon emissions, but people were not thinking about it they're thinking about it in a linear way. Like, this is a problem, right? They were seeing it as a problem and not an opportunity. Whereas he, I won't give all the secrets away, but he was looking at various things like carbon credits or other regulatory incentives, different things like this. And he said, well, actually, if you look at it this way, this thing's a huge advantage, right? With a bit of technology, it's a regulatory incentives, we can actually reconstitute things and create value that nobody else is creating. So I do agree with you that this idea that if you step back and think about, how might I reimagine the ecosystem and where value might come from, then new things can open up.
And you're touching on an important point because, and it goes back to your question in terms of how we're operating at this time to deliver maximum impact, because we recognize that we work for many of the biggest organizations in the world, and we want them to see the opportunity for value creation in this, because inevitably they will move faster. They see that. The problem is the way the world positions this agenda is that it is seen as a threat. And if the world sees it as a threat, then they're more likely to stay in their strongholds for longer, notwithstanding the regulatory stick. And there will be a reluctance. There will be a reluctance to move. But there is opportunity for value creation across the piece when you actually start to shine a different light on the agenda, and you look at the space that is created through the disruption in these models.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering is, sounds like you've got big goals, right? You want to create this impact at scale. You want to lead a whole bunch of leaders into this new paradigm, right? Into this new era. What's going to need to shift in how you operate as a leader so that you can multiply your impact? It's one of my favorite questions, right? Because we operate in a certain way. You obviously build a fantastic business, but I'm wondering, where's the multiplication lever for you as you kind of think about this huge challenge, right, to bring the world leaders into this future era?
Okay, so that is a great question.
It's a deep one. It's just a small question, right? How are you going to totally reinvent yourself? But hey, why not? Let's go there. See what we.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I look at myself and I think, people say, hey, you're post-industrial. Still to this day, I'm not quite sure what that means. You probably got a better idea. But what I know is that there's a whole new generation of leaders that have grown up in a more digital world than I have done, and are more able to embrace so much of this disruption and the speed by which the markets are moving. And that excites me. That new breed of leaders excites me. So I'm trying to sort of, surround myself with people who have got that kind of agility. But I think what's really important, and I suppose the main response that I would make to that question is that I see that most corporations have got cultures that are command and control, and especially in people businesses. When people businesses get to a certain size, then, people look across the office and say, I used to know everybody in this company, I was in this office, and now I don't. Because I don't know people, then all of a sudden people start looking like a risk rather than an opportunity. And if a corporation starts to look at people or assets as risks, then they box them up, put controls around them. And it's amazing how quickly, these empowered, energized, entrepreneurial businesses flip into a command control structure, which that suppresses their potential. And if we are going to be true to our mission and to be able to deliver maximum impact, we must retain, as we grow, a culture of empowerment. Because what we need to do is we need to empower the assets of this organization and unleash them to be able to deliver maximum impact through our clients, who are our vehicle to deliver impact, through our clients, to deliver the impact that aligns with our mission. I find myself increasingly, whether I'm chief executive officer or whether I'm chief culture officer, I spend an increasing amount of time making sure that we retain, protect, reinforce that culture of empowerment, so that people who come to work at Anthesis feel that they're getting more accelerated learning and development because they're being empowered and unleashed to be able to deliver the kind of change that they want to deliver. That's how they've chosen to live their life. That's their vocation. And they want Anthesis to be the platform for them to be able to deliver that kind of work out of the world.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's this whole idea of the CEO being the custodian of the environment, right, of the culture, and of, I think you're right, as businesses grow, they can be really easy to, the hierarchy kind of, the word ossifies almost, and people move from entrepreneurial spirit to protective mindset, which doesn't always serve us. Yeah, well, thank you for this conversation, Stuart. What I think what's coming across is that you've thought really deeply, about these issues, that you're looking very, in a very structured way about how to shift from one world to the other and take your clients on that journey. And this is a journey that indeed you've been on for, whatever you said, 20, 30 years since you've been in your education, right, in this area. So if people want to kind of find out more about you and what Anthesis does, or about the book, where are the best places for them to go?
Well, here's the book. The Adventures of Sustainable Performance, published by Wiley, and available here all sorts of outlets in different parts of the world. Amazon probably being the most obvious place. And then anthesisgroup.com. And we have got all the sort of typical social media channels that you might expect us to have. So there's quite a bit of information out there on us. And we run a whole series of webinars and we believe that we've got quite a lot of knowledge now that is going to be useful for the world in Anthesis, and we want to get it out there. So hopefully there's quite a lot of assets that are publicly available for people to get access to.
Yeah, that's great. Let me ask you one kind of last question, perhaps. Obviously, there's plenty of educational resources, your book and the resources you just mentioned. But if somebody's a leader in a business and they're thinking, you know what, this is like nagging me, I'm not really making much of it. It's pretty much business as usual for me right now, my own leadership. I'm not quite sure where I can make a difference, or can I even? And what's a question you'd invite them to kind of start to think about, right? Or a place where they can start to think differently about their leadership. Like what could be a starting point be for somebody who's not quite sure, even whether they quite want to go on this journey or whether they should, or whether they can?
Yeah, look, I think they should, first of all, they should understand the regulatory landscape. So they need to know where they're going to be forced to go on it. They then need to look at the potential opportunity of value creation. They then need to test the enthusiasm, the appetite from their stakeholders, and it's probably going to surprise them. That will then give them a sense as to whether there is the organizational will to step into this transition. And then the leaders have got to then test their own commitment, but also the commitment of the team of people around them, because the team, leaders and the teams around them that have got primary duty of managing the status quo and seeking incremental efficiency gains. Maybe a different leadership team, but the leadership teams that are required to go on a journey and to step into the unknown, and where, agility and adaptability may actually be the superpowers of the next decades, as opposed to efficiency being the superpower of the last decades. So, these are the kind of tests. And so for us, one of the things that we do when we're engaging with a new client who wants at a C-suite level, who asks us about this kind of question is we would run a few tests in terms of where they are from a governance perspective, where they are from a leadership effectiveness perspective, where they are in terms of their organizational will, and really test out these kind of things and then play it back to them as to how prepared we believe that we are for success. For many years we have done some fantastic sustainability work, and then we realized that actually there was never the governance platform in place to be able to make a success out of the other stuff that we're doing. So we believe that during this early stage of really testing out these kind of things at a leadership and governance level.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that idea that you said at the start, that people might be surprised if they actually do test out the appetite of their stakeholders to engage in some of these experiments or initiatives. Because that's a great place to end. Like, what if, right? What if this is a bigger opportunity than you imagine? What if this is a defining moment in your leadership, right? These are great questions to lean into, I think, as we wrap up here. So, Stuart, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your perspectives here on this, you call it the decisive decade that's ahead of us, and as a wake-up call for everybody, right? That all of us, that what decisions do we make in this decade, and how does that pan out? So, many thanks for that. And look forward to seeing how you and how Anthesis continue to grow and evolve as you support the world on this agenda.
My pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Stuart. Bye-bye. Well, that's a wrap. If you received value from this conversation, please do leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'd deeply appreciate it. And if you'd like to check out the show notes from this episode, head to xquadrant.com/podcast, where you'll find all the details. Now, finally, when you're in top leadership, who supports and challenges you at a deep level to help you multiply your impact? Discover more about the different ways we can support you at xquadrant.com.